It was a quiet Wednesday morning at Blake Enterprises. The polished marble floors of the lobby reflected the soft light pouring in through towering glass windows. Executives moved with a clipped, efficient pace, their fingers tapping at phones, their voices murmuring into Bluetooth earpieces. In the midst of this daily rush, Christian Blake stepped into the lobby. As precise and composed as always. Tall, impeccably dressed in a pale blue tailored suit with his tie knotted to perfection, Christian carried the air of a man who ruled entire markets. At 35, he had been dubbed the ICEO by the financial media for a reason. He was brilliant, ruthlessly efficient, and, by all accounts, emotionally unreachable. He gave a slight, formal nod to his assistant, who was waiting near the private elevator with a folder of briefing documents in hand. But then, something caught his eye. Near the grand front desk, a little girl sat quietly on the polished tile floor. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her blonde curls framed a delicate face with wide, blue eyes that looked startlingly familiar. She wore a white dress that was slightly wrinkled, a denim jacket far too big for her small frame, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. In her lap sat a tiny pink backpack. Its sparkles faded from use. No one else seemed to notice her. Executives strode past, their minds on quarterly reports and stock prices. The receptionist glanced at Christian uncertainly, as if unsure whether to intervene. Christian hesitated, a strange tightening in his chest. Then, against everything his demanding schedule dictated, he walked toward the child and crouched in front of her. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes clear and impossibly calm. Then, she held something out in her tiny hand. It was a hair clip, small, plastic, and shaped like a butterfly with faux crystal wings, dulled by time. "I want to buy a dad," she said, her tone utterly serious. "I have this. It's special." Christian stared at her, stunned. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, the absurd request or the way his heart seemed to physically shift at her words. He took the clip from her hand, turning it over gently. Something about it felt oddly familiar, but he couldn't place the memory. He cleared his throat. "Why do you want to buy a dad?" The girl blinked slowly. "Because mommy cries at night. She tries to be quiet, but I hear her. I just want to help her smile again." Christian's breath caught. He had weathered corporate collapses, hostile takeovers, and lawsuits worth billions. But he was completely unprepared for this. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said, standing up and brushing invisible dust from her dress. "I'm 4.5. He managed a faint smile. "Well, Lily, I'm Christian." She nodded, accepting this as if they had just signed a deal. "I can't pay you," she said, almost apologetically. "But I'll share my pancakes if you help mommy." A corner of Christian's mouth twitched into a genuine smile. "That's a pretty good offer." Then, after a moment that felt like a lifetime, he said softly, "Let me be him for free." Lily's eyes lit up. Not with simple joy, but with something much deeper. Trust. She stepped forward, wrapped her tiny fingers around his. and whispered, "Daddy. Help Mommy." His phone buzzed in his pocket. His assistant stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Blake. You're 9 o'clock." Christian raised a hand without looking back. "Cancel everything," he said. His voice firm. "Sir. You want me to cancel your board meeting?" Christian looked down at Lily's trusting face. Then nodded. "Yes. I'm going with her." The bustling lobby fell still. Phones stopped mid-scroll. Conversations halted. People watched in disbelief as the man they thought they knew walked away from the very empire he had built. Led by a child no taller than his knee. Christian didn't care. He tightened his grip gently around Lily's hand. And together, they walked out of the building. The glass door shut behind them with a soft hiss, muffling the buzz of corporate urgency, leaving only the sound of Lily's small footsteps echoing beside his. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know who this little girl really was or what he would find when he met her mother. But for the first time in years, his heart felt truly, terrifyingly awake. He looked down at the hair clip still in his hand. The dull plastic glinted faintly in the morning sun. It was, somehow, the most valuable thing anyone had ever offered him. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building with peeling paint and rusted banisters. The hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and boiled rice. Christian followed Lily up the narrow stairs, still gripping her tiny hand. Not sure where they were going, only knowing he had to follow. At the door, Lily pulled a small key from her backpack and unlocked it with the confidence of someone who had done it many times before. She pushed it open. Inside, the light was dim, the windows clouded with dust. A thin blanket was folded neatly on an old sofa. A few well-loved toys sat in a corner, and colorful drawings were taped carefully to the wall. In the center of the room, lying on the worn couch, was a woman. Her skin was pale, and her golden hair was pulled back in a low, tired bun. She turned her head slowly at the sound of the door. Christian stopped cold. "Rebecca." His voice was a quiet, disbelieving whisper. The woman blinked, struggling to sit up. "Christian Blake." She breathed. Time seemed to fall away in that moment. Her face was thinner now, her eyes lined with exhaustion. But they were still the same soft hazel. She was still the girl who had once made him believe in magic. Lily ran over and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "Mommy," she said. "I found him." Rebecca's lips trembled. "Found who?" "Baby." Lily turned and pointed. "My daddy. I told you he'd come." Christian stood frozen as the air in the room thickened with unspoken history. He looked at Rebecca again. This time not just as the woman lying before him, but through the haze of a 5-year-old memory. It had been raining that day. He remembered standing in the university library, a bouquet of red roses in one hand and a small, wrapped box in the other. He had waited for hours by the corner table where she always read. He had texted, called, looked for her everywhere. Then, just as he was about to leave, he'd seen her across the street in the downpour, standing in the shadows. Her eyes had locked with his for only a second before she turned and ran. He'd never seen her again. All she left behind was a letter, folded into his mailbox the next day. A quiet goodbye. No explanations. Just 4 lines. I'm sorry. I wish the world had been different. Please don't wait for me. Be who you're meant to be. He remembered crying. The only time he could recall doing so as an adult. 2 months later. Still heartbroken. He accepted his mother's push to study abroad. Burying himself in work until he forgot how to feel. And now, years later, here she was. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again, Christian said. His voice low and heavy. Rebecca's eyes brimmed with tears. I never wanted to leave like that. I couldn't let you see what I was going through. He took a step closer. Why? Rebecca? Why didn't you let me help? She swallowed hard. The story tumbling out in a rush of pain. After my dad died, everything fell apart. My mom got sick. There were hospital bills. Medications. I had to drop out. Work full-time. Sleep on friends' floors. I thought if I stayed, I'd only drag you down. Your family. They would have never accepted someone like me. You could have told me. He insisted. His voice aching. I was ashamed. She whispered. And then, I met someone. He said he'd help with the bills if I married him. But it was a lie. He drank. He was cruel. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to leave. Christian's throat tightened. He looked down at Lily bright-eyed. Innocent. And completely unaware of the storm that had brought her into the world. She's not mine, he said softly. More to himself than anyone. Rebecca shook her head. No. But she's the best thing I've ever done. Christian slowly pulled something from his pocket. The little plastic hair clip. The one Lily had handed him only hours earlier. I gave you this, he murmured. His memory finally clicking into place. The day I was going to tell you how I felt. Rebecca gasped. Her hand flying to her mouth. You still had it? She did. Tears finally slipped down Rebecca's cheeks. I never forgot you, Christian. Not for a single day. He walked closer. Kneeling beside her. And I never stopped loving you. Lily climbed onto the couch between them and looked up at Christian. He's my dad, she said simply, resting her small hand on his knee. It wasn't a question or a declaration. It was truth. Spoken with the absolute certainty of a child. Rebecca began to sob quietly. Christian reached out instinctively, wrapping an arm around her. She didn't resist. She leaned into his strength. They stayed like that for a long time, 3 souls tangled in silence. Stitched together by pain. Time. And the strange kind of hope that only rises when everything else has fallen apart. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not the past. Not the mistakes. Not the lost time. Only now. Only this. Only the fragile, miraculous chance to begin again. The iron gates creaked open slowly as Christian's car pulled into the long driveway of his private estate on the outskirts of the city. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across the stone path and manicured hedges. Lights glowed softly from the windows of the expansive home. A place built for luxury but, until now, untouched by warmth. Rebecca sat quietly in the back seat. her head leaning gently against the window. Lily, nestled beside her, hummed softly to herself, still clutching a stuffed bunny that was missing one ear. Christian glanced at them in the rearview mirror, and the image stirred something strange and tender inside him. The housekeeper greeted them at the door with a cautious smile. She had been given only minimal instructions: set up the guest suite, prepare light meals, and say nothing. The guest room had been transformed. A queen-sized bed was dressed in fresh linens. Soft lighting emanated from the lamps, and a reclining chair sat by the window. Christian had even ordered a child-sized bed for Lily, complete with star-patterned sheets and a plush pillow shaped like a moon. He showed them the room, feeling uncertain, almost nervous. Rebecca looked around and whispered, "This is too much." Christian shook his head. "You need comfort. You deserve more." She gave him a small, tired smile, but he could see the discomfort behind it. Her eyes scanning the opulence as though trying to find a corner small enough to hide in. Over the next few days, Christian's schedule was flipped on its head. He cancelled meetings and delegated projects. He spent his mornings attempting, unsuccessfully, to cook oatmeal that didn't burn. He ordered a humidifier after Googling what helped with coughing fits from chemotherapy. He even researched child nutrition to plan better lunches for Lily. There were awkward moments. He spilled soup, knocked over Lily's juice twice, and once burned a pot so badly the kitchen smelled like charcoal for hours. But he kept trying. Lily adjusted quickly. She danced through the halls, played hide-and-seek in the garden, and fell asleep curled up beside her mom each night. Rebecca remained quieter, still weary. Sometimes Christian would find her staring at her own reflection in a hallway mirror, lost in thought. On the fifth night, a sudden, violent fit of coughing jolted the house awake. Christian rushed to the guest room, where he found Rebecca hunched over the side of the bed, struggling to breathe between spasms. Her hands trembled. She was trying not to wake Lily, who was still asleep in her small bed nearby. Christian dropped to his knees, grabbed a towel, and held her steady as she heaved. He didn't flinch at the mess. He just held her, whispering softly, "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe." He stayed with her through the night, cleaning her up, rubbing her back, and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. When her breathing finally settled into a shallow rhythm, she leaned into him, her eyes closed, too exhausted to speak. The next morning, he brought a doctor to the house, a kind, respectful man who spoke in gentle tones. He didn't let Rebecca lift a finger when she tried to protest, saying she didn't want to be a burden. Christian simply said, "You're not. Not now. Not ever." That afternoon, they sat together in the small sunroom just off the kitchen. Rebecca wore a soft robe, her face pale but peaceful. Christian sat across from her, sipping coffee. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In the shared silence, they watched Lily chase butterflies in the garden, her laughter filtering through the open windows. Christian looked at Rebecca, his eyes full of something new, something softer than sympathy and deeper than guilt. It was a kind of reverence. She caught his gaze and, for the first time, held it. She didn't look away. There were no grand declarations, No tearful apologies. Just the quiet understanding between two people who had both been broken by life in very different ways and were now learning, slowly, how to piece themselves back together, side by side. And maybe, just maybe, with time, they could become whole again. A month had passed. Rebecca's strength had begun to dip lower with each round of treatment. She spent more time in bed, her body aching from the inside out. Her appetite reduced to sips of water and the occasional bite of toast. The house had adjusted to a gentler rhythm. Meals were quieter. Lights dimmed earlier. And Christian's presence grew steadier with each passing day. Then one morning, he found her standing in front of the mirror in the guest room. Her back slightly hunched, her hands clutching the hem of her robe. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her fingers trembled as they reached up, brushing against her scalp. Most of her hair was gone now. What remained were thin, scattered strands clinging weakly to her pale skin. In the daylight streaming through the window, her reflection looked fragile and foreign. A specter of the woman she used to be. She let out a soft, broken breath. "I look like a ghost," she whispered to the mirror. Christian stepped inside quietly. "No," he said softly. "You look like a fighter." Rebecca flinched, startled. "Don't," she said quickly, turning away. "Please don't try to make this beautiful." He didn't speak right away. Instead, he walked to the dresser and picked up a folded silk scarf, a soft shade of teal, like seafoam under moonlight. He sat on the edge of the bed, opened it slowly in his hands, and then looked at her. "Sit with me," he asked. She hesitated, her chin quivering, but something in his voice gentle, steady, without pity made her walk toward him. Christian reached out and helped her sit down beside him. He didn't touch her yet. He just let the silence breathe between them. "I bought this scarf the day I saw the color of your first notebook," he said, his voice a low murmur. "That old, beat-up one you always brought to the library. You said the color calmed you." Rebecca stared at the scarf in his hands. She hadn't thought about that notebook in years. "I kept it," she whispered, "even when I had to sell almost everything else." Christian unfolded the scarf and carefully raised it. He paused, letting her see what he was doing. "May I?" She nodded once, tears already brimming in her eyes. He gently wrapped the scarf around her head, tying it softly at the nape of her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, warm and careful. Then he leaned back and looked at her. Not just with kindness, but with awe. "You're beautiful," he said, inside and out. Rebecca's lip trembled. "How can you still say that?" Christian reached up and touched her cheek lightly. "Because I see you. Not the hair. Not the pain. You." She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her face. "I used to think no one would ever want to see me like this," she whispered. "I want to," he replied, his voice unwavering. "Every version of you. Because none of them are broken to me." He stood and took her hand, guiding her slowly to the mirror. Rebecca stared at her reflection. The scarf was soft and graceful. It framed her face in a way that didn't feel like hiding, but like honoring something precious. She looked different. But not less. Not diminished. She looked strong. Quietly radiant. Real. For the first time since her hair began to fall. She didn't turn away from the mirror. She leaned forward slightly and touched her cheek. Her eyes welled up again. But this time, the tears weren't from shame. "I don't recognize her," she said softly. Christian moved behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "Then let me introduce you." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "This is Rebecca. The woman I fell in love with twice, once in silence. And once in truth. The woman who raised a daughter with nothing but grit and love. The woman who makes this house feel like a home." She stared at him through the glass. "Overcome. Do you really mean that?" she asked. "I've never meant anything more," he said. Rebecca breathed out slowly, her hands resting on the scarf. She nodded. Just a little. And in that small, silent gesture was something massive: acceptance. Acceptance of her reflection. Of his love. Of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was still whole. They didn't speak again that evening. But when Lily tiptoed in to say good night and curled up next to her mother, Rebecca smiled softly. Not because she looked the same as she once did, but because, finally, she no longer needed to. The sun was just beginning to rise when Christian stood in the kitchen, holding a small pink hairbrush in one hand and a blue ribbon in the other. Lily sat patiently on a stool in front of him, her tiny legs swinging, her golden curls wild from sleep. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. "How hard can this be?" Lily giggled. "You're doing it backwards, Daddy." He blinked. "I am." She nodded solemnly. "The bow goes on top, not under." Christian exhaled in mock defeat and crouched down beside her. "Deal. But you're going to have to teach me again tomorrow." She leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Okay." 20 minutes later, they were walking hand in hand through the doors of Little Pines Preschool. The hallway smelled of crayons and glue sticks, and the walls were covered with finger paintings and construction paper animals. Children laughed and tugged at their parents' hands, their backpacks bouncing against tiny shoulders. Christian, 6'3" in a navy blazer, looked completely out of place. Rebecca had wanted to come, but the night before had been rough. Nausea and fatigue had kept her in bed, and Christian had insisted she rest, promising he could handle it. Now, standing inside the bustling classroom, he wasn't so sure. A woman in a floral blouse approached with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Hi there. I'm Miss Howard. And you must be." She glanced between Lily and the imposing man holding her hand. He gave a small, respectful nod. "Christian Blake. I'm her." He paused, looking down at Lily, who was clutching his hand tightly. "I'm her dad." Miss Howard's smile widened. "Wonderful. Welcome, Mr. Blake." From the side of the room, Christian heard a few murmurs. A group of other parents had turned, whispering. One pointed discreetly in his direction. He recognized the glance he'd seen it before on red carpets, in boardrooms, on the covers of glossy magazines. But this time, it didn't sting. He looked down at Lily and smiled. She whispered, Are they talking about us? He knelt to her level. Maybe. But we're too cool to care. Right? She grinned. Right. After helping her hang her tiny coat on a hook labeled Lily R. He kissed the top of her head and told her he'd be waiting outside at the end of the day. She waved and ran off to the coloring station, her lopsided pigtails bouncing behind her. Back in his car, Christian sat for a long time before starting the engine. His heart felt full in a way he hadn't expected. Later that afternoon, after a quiet work session in his home office, Christian returned to find a surprise waiting on his desk. It was a drawing, made with messy crayon lines and bold colors. 3 stick figures stood beneath a big yellow sun. One was tall, with a tie and glasses. One had short, spiky hair and a blue scarf. The smallest one had a crown made of hearts. Above them, in large, wobbly letters, was a single word, Daddy. He stared at it. Not for a minute, but for what felt like an hour. He didn't frame it or post it. He just let it sit there on his desk. A splash of pure, unadulterated love amidst the cold glass and steel. And every time he looked at it, he felt something shift again inside him, not like an earthquake, but like the ground finally settling after a long storm. He had spent his whole life building towers of success. Now, with a crayon picture and a little girl who believed in him completely, he realized he was finally building a home. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in the pale light of a late afternoon sun filtering through half-closed blinds. The machines beeped softly in the background, tracking the fragile rhythms of life. Rebecca lay motionless, her face pale, her body weakened from the 5th and most brutal round of chemotherapy. She had barely touched the soup Christian had brought earlier. Christian sat beside her, his fingers gently wrapped around her frail hand. His once sharp eyes now carried the heavy weight of sleepless nights and unspoken prayers. The room, sterile and white, felt like a waiting room between hope and heartbreak. Rebecca stirred slightly, her lips parting. If something happens to me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Promise me you won't let Lily grow up feeling alone. Christian's throat tightened. He leaned in closer, squeezing her hand. Nothing is going to happen, he said softly. But his own voice trembled. Because I'll be there every step of the way. She gave him a tired, faint smile. You can't promise that. I can promise this, he said, rising to his feet. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The room seemed to distill into silence. Slowly, he knelt beside the bed, his knees pressing into the cold tile floor, his heart pounding louder than the machines around them. Rebecca, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Marry me. He looked into her weary eyes. I'm not asking out of pity, or out of fear. I'm asking because I love you. Because I choose you. Every single day. In sickness and in health. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Rebecca's eyes filled instantly. She looked down at the man before her, strong and sure in a way she had never expected. But still, her voice cracked with fear. I'm a sick woman. Christian, she whispered. I can't give you a perfect life. Christian took her hand and pressed it to his heart. Then let me be the one who gets to take care of you. You don't have to be perfect. You and Lily. You've already healed the parts of me I didn't even know were broken. She blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back the flood of tears. Across the room, Lily sat on a small plastic chair by the window, drawing a picture with intense focus. She giggled softly, her bright hair glowing in the light, completely unaware of the gravity unfolding behind her. Rebecca looked at her daughter, at the small miracle she had somehow raised through storms and silence, at the reason she had fought so hard to live. Lily glanced up, caught her mother's eye, and smiled. That smile, innocent, whole, full of trust, was what made Rebecca turn back to Christian. Her voice shook, but her answer was clear. Yes. She breathed, her eyes glistening. Yes. I'll marry you. Christian didn't cheer or laugh. He just exhaled, as though the whole world had been holding its breath with him. He rose, kissed her knuckles, and then her forehead. They didn't need to say more. In that tiny room, in the midst of pain and uncertainty, they had made something real. A vow not to perfection, but to presence. Not to easy days, but to facing every hard one together. Spring came early that year, soft and full of promise. A few weeks after the doctors delivered the miraculous news, planned the wedding. It was held on a Saturday morning in late May on the sprawling lawn of Christian's estate, overlooking the lake. The sky was a watercolor blue, dotted with clouds too delicate to shade the sun. White lilies bloomed along the path to a simple floral archway, their petals dancing in the breeze as if they, too, were celebrating. Christian stood beneath the arch in a soft gray suit. No tie. His hands clasped tightly in front of him as he watched the house, his heart thrumming in his throat. Then, the doors opened. Rebecca stepped out, barefoot on the cool stone patio, her simple silk gown whispering around her ankles. Her hair, now a soft, golden pixie cut, was pinned gently to one side with the old crystal butterfly clip faded, but radiant with meaning. Her eyes met his, and in that instant, everything else fell away. She walked slowly, with Lily just ahead of her, scattering handfuls of white rose petals down the aisle with dramatic flair. The guests, only a small group of close friends and the medical team who had helped save her, watched with quiet smiles and teary eyes. When Rebecca reached Christian, he took her hands as if they were the most sacred things in the world. They barely looked at the officiant. Their eyes locked on each other as they spoke their vows in soft voices that trembled not with fear, but with profound gratitude. Christian went first. I found you when I thought I had everything, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And you showed me I had nothing at all. You gave me everything that matters. Rebecca smiled, her eyes glistening. You saw me when I didn't recognize myself, she said. And you loved me anyway. That love, it brought me back to life. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Christian didn't hesitate. He kissed her with a reverence and joy that was breathtaking to witness, a kiss that said, "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for staying. Thank you for saying yes." Lily jumped up and down and clapped, shouting, "They did it." And somewhere in the distance, the lake sparkled as if it, too, was applauding. The wedding wasn't grand, but it was perfect. It wasn't about chandeliers or champagne. It was about three people who had been broken in different ways finally finding their way back to each other. Choosing every single day to be whole. Together. 1 year later. The world looked entirely different. Not because the skyline had changed or the markets had shifted. But because their life had found a new, gentler rhythm, one filled with laughter, softness, and a love deeper than success could ever offer. Rebecca's strength had returned completely. Her smile now a daily, unburdened part of their world. That summer, they took a trip to a quiet beachside resort tucked away on a Greek island, far from tourists and noise. One evening, they lay side by side on a wooden lounge chair made for two, but which somehow fit three. Rebecca rested against Christian's chest, and Lily was curled in between them, her small head rising and falling with her mother's breath as the sun set, painting the sky in amber and coral. Christian kissed Rebecca's temple. "This is it," he murmured. "This is the life I never knew I needed." Rebecca laced her fingers with his. "And it all started," she said, her voice full of wonder, "with one little girl and one tiny plastic hair clip." Lily giggled from her cozy spot. "Told you I bought the best dad ever." They laughed quietly. The kind of laughter that comes when the heart is truly at peace. Later, they kicked off their sandals and wandered down to the shoreline. The sand was still warm, and the waves lapped at their ankles as they walked, Christian on one side, Rebecca on the other, and Lily skipping between them, holding both their hands. Then Lily pulled free and dashed ahead, spinning in circles, her dress billowing as her laughter rose like music into the night air. Christian and Rebecca followed, their fingers still entwined. She looked at him. "I used to think life had passed me by." He smiled. "And I used to think I had everything. Until I realized I had nothing that really mattered." Their eyes met. No more words needed. As the moon climbed higher, the three of them ran along the sand, their footprints fading with the tide. Lily's giggles echoed across the shore, joined by Rebecca's joyful laugh. And Christian, the man once known for his silence, laughed louder than them both. They weren't perfect. They didn't share blood. But they shared everything that counted: love, choice, healing, and a home made not of walls, but of hearts that refused to let go when it mattered most. The world kept spinning. But on that beach, under that sky, a little girl who once tried to buy a dad now had a family that love had already paid for. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of healing, hope, and the kind of love that chooses you, even when life doesn't. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that family isn't always defined by blood but by the hearts that choose to stay, then we invite you to become part of our storytelling family. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more heartwarming, emotional, and true-to-life tales that remind us of what truly matters. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that just might change your day, or even your heart. And always remember, sometimes the smallest act of courage, like offering someone a faded plastic hair clip, can open the door to a brand new life. We'll see you in the next story.